Welcome to Mic'd Up for Leadership, the podcast that gives you the tools to lead with confidence. I'm one of your hosts, Alex Dresen. I'm joined by my longtime friend, colleague, and new resident of the library, Jourdan Hilaire. Jourdan, how you doing today?
Hey, I'm doing well, Alex. How about yourself?
Hey, I'm doing just fine. I got back to my Saturday run club, and it was real good to celebrate a friend's 36th birthday with a 3.6 mile run. So I'll take that over a 10, 15, 20 mile run any day. How about you?
Right. More power to you, man. I'm still trying to get there. But overall, I'm doing well, man. Just finished, a week of finals. Was in the library, long periods of time throughout these last, I would say, 5 to 7 days. But I'm glad and thankful that got it done. Cheers to that. And yeah, ready to have some good conversation with you. I know it's been a while.
It's been a while, and I'm proud of you for getting all those papers done, because let me tell you, I know it's been busy at work for me, but I know I can clock out at a certain point, and I can leave some stuff on the to-do list for the next day. You've got those deadlines at midnight or whatever that next class is, and you've got to turn out those papers. So I'm sure that was a grind to get through.
No, absolutely. It was, I'm a full-time student, so, taking 3 classes, 3 different final papers. But again, I've learned a lot this semester through those classes and ready for the summer.
Awesome. I'm excited for the summer. I'm excited for new beginnings. And that's kind of the theme of our episode today, is that transition to new seasons, new beginnings, and that passing of the torch, right? So a lot of different transitions probably have occurred. This episode is going to be released after a lot of people's finals and commencement have occurred. But for student organizations that are transitioning to new membership, and especially those that are still going to be interacting with each other while they're getting set up for the very next year, perhaps attending some conferences in the near future. Shout out the NACUR conference that will be coming out the week that this is live. It's really important for us to figure out and help leaders, whether they're the professionals as advisors, the leaders themselves, or just in general, anyone that wants to help people with that transition between groups and taking on a new position, how we can set that next leader up for success. And so I thought it might be fun to look back, Jourdan. So I'm sure you might have looked at the note a little bit, but not to put you on the spot. What's the worst handoff you've ever witnessed or lived through when it comes to those organizational transitions?
Honestly, when I first saw the notes, I'm gonna be honest. When I think about the worst handoff I've seen, this is actually less I experienced, but also seen. I guess experienced as well. But recently, actually, I saw a video. I'm not sure if you may have seen this, but it kind of went viral of a track meet. I'm not gonna say the school. I'm not sure if you're familiar with what I'm talking about, but there was a school that was in a track meet. And the first person, the first leg, they were running, I believe, like a 4x1, right? So 4 people running a full round of track, right? So 400 meters. And the person was in the front, but by the time they got to the second leg, they were in a completely different lane. And when they tried to hand it off, I think when they looked up, they realized that the person was nowhere near and they got disqualified, right? So when you talked about, those handoffs, right? Those fumbles, being able to actually finish strong. I immediately thought about that because, you can kind of equate that to like student leadership, right? Being able to have, that focus from the start to the end, right? Being able to have that communication to ensure where you currently are, but also where you plan on going as well, right? And to make sure that everybody's on the same page. So I immediately thought about that because, I felt bad for them because it seemed like they were actually on a good trajectory, right? Maybe not necessarily win because it was really early, first and second leg. However, they were in the lead, right? So there was a lot of progress being made, right? Early on. But because I believe it seems like they're at some point, for whatever reason, there was a disconnect and a lack of maybe focus on maybe somebody's end. Unfortunately, they didn't do well and they didn't get to make it to the next leg. So I just think about having that focus, having that strong communication from the start to the end, ensuring everyone's on the same page. I think definitely plays a huge part when it comes to that transition, right? Of for organizations, for people, when you're not necessarily even present anymore, right? But how do you ensure that the next person that takes on that baton, right, or takes on that leadership role, or is responsible for that organization moving forward, how do they set up for success? So that's definitely one of the things I definitely thought about.
Okay, so you went literal handoffs, and I love that you did that. Being a former track star yourself,
Yes.
I can go back to my track days in high school when I was the middle leg of a 4x2 because I was fast, but not as fast as all the other guys. But happy to be part of that team. And that would be my worst nightmare. Having that person not be there, and I'm just running and holding out the stick and the baton. I'll get back to my worst handoff I saw, but I actually want to ask you a follow-up question because you were talking about the idea of communication and whatnot, and how that could happen. The first segment we were kind of talking about is why these transitions go wrong, and why do you think most leaders are so focused on finishing that when this happens, they forget about the transition?
I think it's a couple different reasons, possibly. From my experience, sometimes you're not really thinking about the end goal. Sometimes, you're not really having that long-term thinking of, what this looks like, whether that is 5 minutes from now or even, 2 years from now. But you maybe thinking about just maybe yourself in that moment. And not thinking about maybe the people around you and how it impacts people around you moving forward. So I think that plays a part, right? Not having that future focus mindset. I also think that sometimes sometimes I feel like with student leaders, it's a lot about defining what you want this to look like, right? What do you want to be remembered by, right? And sometimes that also that takes, I think we'll talk about this later on as well, right? When it comes to having a support system around you, right? Advisors or professionals and staff members. But I know we're talking about that a little bit more about, if you never seen what it looks like, it's really hard for you to actually put yourself in a position to actually be in that progressive spot, right? Or have that long-term success if you necessarily haven't really been in that moment before, right? So having that support system around you, but also having that, like I said, that future focused mindset to really think about, the people, the processes, maybe even the documents that need to make sure that you are developing, not just, in the middle part at the end, but also having those conversations in the beginning too.
Yeah, I think about the end when you said that, and I'll get to the advisor piece a little bit because that's kind of the piece of it that messed up my handoff that I had one time. But well, but no, I think as a student leader and any leader that's going through a big project, your goal is to lead through a year, and there is a natural endpoint. In fact, we have banquet season where you're having dry chicken and pasta 14 times in 13 days sometimes. And it's just celebration after celebration because we do want to reward all the hard work that these students are going through. And it's abutted right up against our finals season, right? So it's really easy for us to forget about that and look on to graduation and the next role that someone might be taking on. It might be that they're graduating, going to a professional role or grad school. It might be that they're going to become an RA, or they're going to, you name it, take on the president role after being a secretary and decide that, I'll just talk with the incoming secretary later on. It will be fine because I've been there, so I'll be able to help them whenever, and not have eyes on the plan to actually happen. So we talk about this idea of completing the assignment. You're leading through an academic year, and the idea that the event is happening, we celebrate it. There is the finals, and of course, school comes first. But that idea of transition and a full handoff, it kind of seems like extra credit. And that extra credit is something that they may not need in that moment. They need those points to go towards their biology class or something like that. And so I even think about, so going back to my worst handoff, something that, and I blame, honestly, us as student leaders at Marquette. I think we were amazing student leaders. I want to shout out myself and all my colleagues and friends that went through these different organizations. But I don't know that, especially in the Greek scene, we relied on advisors a ton. I think we thought I don't know that we knew what was best, but we kind of knew that, okay, it's our organization, we're going to take it on, whatnot. Well, I was president of an honor society, Order of Omega, and so it was top leaders within the Greek scene and they in the Greek community, and we rewarded those with ceremony and a pin and whatnot. But I took it on, and there was really no, like, we had a constitution and we had some guiding principles of what we could do, but we really didn't do anything as an organization. It got to the point where the past president of the organization, I luckily still had her number, but she graduated and she just so happened to be in town. I was like, I need the bank information. Like, we pay dues and we need to order stuff from the national office. And there's no one around that passed off that information. And she's like, oh, I forgot. That's right. But I also never knew to ask for that. And no one ever told her or had a document that said, we need to give you this, this piece of information or this, this process of any kind. We just kind of existed as an honorary, a passive honorary, which is fine. And that's what we ended up doing during our term for the most part. But I was sure to pass off the banking credentials before I graduated to the next president. But that was really tough to realize that if it just wasn't for happenstance that she was in town visiting friends, that I wouldn't have gotten the bank card and I would have had to figure out how to get all the supplies. I didn't even know who my advisor was at that point in time. But I knew I knew I should have asked, because I knew I had advisors, great advisors in other organizations around campus. So I'll take some of that blame, but also just to realize that when those advisors aren't super present, for various reasons, because no one has asked them to be, or just they don't feel like taking that initiative, and they're more of a, hey, if you need me, I'm a wealth of resources, otherwise it's your organization. That's where that transition might go wrong, and where an advisor can really be that connective glue across generations of student leaders to be able to make that transition work.
It's funny you mentioned you didn't know who your advisor was. And, when I hear that from student organizations, I just sometimes have to shake my head, because I know that a lot of times not all the time, but many times if you hear a student leader or an organization mention that they don't know who their advisor is, or they don't know their name, or they're not around a lot of times you notice that organization is struggling, right? Or they have some challenges with organizational leadership or leading a group of their peers, or may not understand the importance or the purpose of, creating an effective transition plan, right? Because again, it goes back to, like you mentioned, like the advisors are supposed to be the ones that kind of are supposed to be the glue, right? That kind of help, kind of connect the dots, right? And a lot of times students may not see those dots, but the advisors do, right? The invisible dots, right? That's because they've already been through before. And it goes back to, I think I mentioned this in a couple episodes ago about, our student leaders are the heart of our institutions, but the advisors are the shield, right? And I firmly believe that. I'll continue to say that, the student leaders, they give us life, right? The student leaders literally provide the energy, right? On our campuses. They really the ones that kind of help build the camaraderie, and the excitement. However, advisors are extremely necessary, right? Especially for those first year students, or I should say those first year student leaders, right? Second year student leaders where, you don't necessarily have that knowledge. So you need professionals, advisors, administrators to kind of help you understand the policies, right? And the protocols when it comes to just, anything and everything when it comes to leading an organization, but also actually managing it or representing an organization on the university level as well. But I do have a question though for you. Have you ever thought about, like, when it comes, I mentioned about the first year students, right? First year student leaders. And of course, they need a lot of support, right? But have you ever experienced when you're like a second or third year student leader, and that having like that, how do you feel like that I guess helps with like that emotional connection to the student leadership role that they've been in already for 2 or 3 years, and that like transitional piece as well.
Oh, that's so interesting. So from the mindset of if they're returning to a role they have, I think that there is an opportunity to do more, but also some complacency, right? The organization that they led for the past year, in many ways, is going to be that next organization, right? So if you're a president of a student government and you're leading all these initiatives, you'll know that when this initiative comes around to plan in advance and be more operationally sound, but to realize that every new organization that comes around is a brand new entity, right? To have the emotional intelligence that just because you have relationships within an organization, you need to form those in a brand new state with the new leaders and even the returning leaders who may have more motivation or different motivation, or just in general different challenges because they're taking on a different role. And so there's emotional maturity that can come through it if there's some good reflection that comes through, but that complacency to repeat the same thing can get an organization stuck. And I think that that's a real challenge if you don't have some intentional reset opportunities over the summer or between terms in some way. We keep talking summer, right? Like that's supposed to be the break period. But you and I both, we engage with our RHA presidents or other organizational presidents quite a bit during those summer periods to keep them, I don't say on their game, but just thinking differently about, yes, you need to be operationally taking care of some business, but like, what is this next opportunity going to look like in that second or third year? And usually they'll step up and have that emotional intelligence, but we have to reflect with them a little bit differently. Is that kind of what you were getting at, or the other parts that you're curious about?
No, absolutely. I kind of think that there's a both and, right? When it comes to, I guess veteran, right? Student leaders that have been in roles for 2 or 3 years, right? Because there's a positive side to it because they kind of now understand, the role, know how to, lead, right? They kind of know how to navigate the campus and can, support those students in doing so, but also going to that third year, third year, it can be some complacency at the same time, and feeling too comfortable sometime, and start to kind of forget at times from my experience, what I've seen before, student leaders forget the purpose and the mission, right? Of the organization, forget their purpose as a leader, right? And the responsibility as well as a veteran leader to bring on the new group of students though. So I definitely understand that for sure.
And that's where I wonder about the handoff, right? We're talking about passing the torch, the act of passing, or that baton in the relay race, as the organization keeps going and it keeps serving different purposes. That is part of the challenge. Ultimately, is we invest in these student leaders and then they move on to bigger and better things, whether that's in their leadership journey or choosing to focus on studies or graduating, right? But then that grind of keeping that organization on track for what its purpose is within an institution, but also allowing those students to make it their own. It's a real big challenge because every single leader's coming in with different personalities, knowledge, et cetera, whether it's even if it's that returning veteran group. So I'm curious, like what does that handoff look like? Like, what are those things that need to get transitioned? We've peppered in a couple things, but let's dial it in for our listeners right now. Like, what needs to be passed on, but both like physically and then the mental mindset, et cetera.
Yeah, I think there's a lot. There's a lot, and it could be a gradual, process too, right? Depending on when you start, right? But I think about we always, harp on transitional documents, right? And when it comes to transitional documents, that can entail passwords, right? And we think about like, oh, that's super basic, like, oh, well, of course, duh. However, I think you and I, have definitely seen that sometimes that still doesn't happen, right? And when it's time for a new, leader or new president, vice president, et cetera, to take over the reins of that organization, they're trying to get access to a social media page and trying to get access to the Google Drive and other folders or other things that requires, passcodes. And they don't have that. So now it takes, a few weeks to a few months to trying to figure that out. You got to work with IT now to reset your passwords and everything else. And then, so just being able to, just simple things such as having the information on documents, but in confidential, in a private, space within online, folder, and making sure that that actually is shared out, right? I think that's really important. When it comes to, the past, your past, pretty much like your history of, the organization, right? So I'm thinking about, historical context, like various programs, right, that that your organization have implemented over the years, right, or the last semester, the campus partners that you work with in the past, right, of course your constitution, right, which is a really big one, depending on organization. But I think most organizations, if you're an official student-led organization on the college campus, has some form of, should have some form of constitution, right? So I think about those type of physical or online documentations, but I also think about cultural knowledge as well, right? Having those one-on-one meetings with the next person that's been elected, right, or selected or chosen to take over the reins, or when it comes to also the next advisor that maybe take over too, right? How can that student leader help that advisor, or how can that current advisor help the incoming advisor be the best support system for that organization? However, and last thing I will say is, one thing that I think there's a reality though with that is sometimes the students that are transitioning out may not be available, right? Because depending on how they, left the organization, right, or departed the organization, that it's important to do your best as an incoming student leader to maybe find someone that may have some historical context, right, or knowledge of the organization, whether that is the general membership, other leadership team members, part of the organization, the advisor, or even maybe the staff members, administrators that are actually overseeing all organizations on campus, right? Which is usually a lot of times the coordinator or director of student leadership and engagement, right? Or other titles that reflect those responsibilities. To really kind of get a grasp, at least a decent grasp of what that organization, what was its purpose, what's its mission, what are some things they did in the past, and also maybe some strategic, if they created like some goals, right, for themselves, just to kind of have that information on hand, so it helps them with make a somewhat of a smoother transition throughout those next few months, instead of starting completely from scratch, which sometimes organizations have to do, are forced to do sometime as well.
One of the most powerful ways I've seen a transition of context and setting occur is having the outgoing student leader write a letter to the incoming student leader. I think it's an opportunity for the outgoing student leader to reflect on their journey from the start of being maybe a little nervous, maybe being confident, but having some challenges along the way. I think it's a personal touch more than an advisor can give, right? An advisor can care as much as they want, but they're not the student in the position. And I think a lot of times that allows for that outgoing student leader to, even if they know them, say, contact me at any point in time, reach out, here's my phone number, here's my email, my social media. And that's something that's optional to them. But I think more times than not, I haven't seen a single student leader not offer that. I think it gives a warm handoff that you're continuing on something and I care about your success. From there, we can hand off all the structural things, the playbook, the transition documents, the passwords. Those are so important because you're behind the eight ball if you don't have that. But I think the best tool I've seen is that written letter in some way, to be able to give them something to hold on to. Honestly, the meeting can happen, but to look back at that as they're going on their journey in the next academic year.
No, absolutely. And I do have a question for you, Alex. Have you ever experienced personally or seen work with students where you're the advisor or know someone else that's been an advisor where there is a student leader right there that they're the president, a vice president, etc., but they actually end up stepping down, right, for whatever reason, or they, have to step down. But a new person, a new student leader actually ends up taking over while that past leader is still part of the organization. Have you ever seen have you ever noticed what any challenges that may occur during those times?
Yeah, that's interesting. I've had a couple thoughts come to mind with that. And usually that what happens is that leader is still a little bit too involved and that handoff doesn't happen. And they still want to guide as a backseat driver. And it's tough because even I know that a lot of people that I've advised before, even my co-advisors, would probably admit that there are times that I advise an organization and I'm clearing more obstacles than I should. I really want to set up organizations for success and let them lead and make this more of an internship opportunity, right? Instead of learning from failure, you can still learn from failure, but learn by learning how to do something the right way, right? We wouldn't throw someone in an internship opportunity and tank a deal or mess up a big event. We would say, here's the right way to do it. And yes, your instinct might be to do this or do that, but your magic is in the relationships you can build and leading the people. But don't think that you need 5 volunteers when you need 50. Don't think you need to show up an hour before the event when you need to be setting up the night before and staging, right? So those are things that I know are a challenge from an advisor standpoint. And then from a student leader standpoint, it's if you don't see that success right away, they may offer too many little bits and pieces of advice because they are taking on that next journey, right? They might be going to a regional position within our RHA system that's out there, or they may be becoming an RA, but they still want to see RHA succeed because that's their baby. They cared about it for so long. And so there are opportunities for the advisor to step in and find ways to channel that energy, right? And so it's not that we don't want them to stay connected, but I think sometimes when they do step down for various reasons, myself included in various ways, in my fraternity, I know that that's something that I was really involved in and was involved in some of the new member process, right? But I found ways to stay engaged, and a successor of mine made me a recruitment closer, I guess was the position, right? So instead of trying to run the recruitment event, instead it was, hey, I need you to talk to this high value prospect that is really interested but nervous about going into the fraternity experience and what that might look like. And then I could focus that energy on closing in a one-on-one basis this opportunity to give them the best understanding of what it looks like to be in the fraternity, because I care so much about bringing in great members. And I was able to bring in some of my closest friends to this day because they enabled me. So shout out Jeff Hackey. I haven't talked to you in 20 years, but that's something that I really valued and made me feel special and important. So if it's providing a training session or an ongoing check-in or even like a greeter role at the biggest event of the year where you get to see 1,000 people come in and you're the first face for them while the programmer is taking on different roles, it's about channeling that energy, right? And having that ongoing connection and not devaluing that outgoing student leader's experience, but making sure that it's not interfering with that returning or incoming student leaders' own unique experience and goals they want to pursue.
Absolutely. I agree. So,
that's something that I'm really excited to talk through. We'll cut this out, but there's a brief internet connectivity issue where I didn't hear Jourdan here. So I don't know if this is a solo episode. I'm going to check in real quick. Jourdan, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Okay, you're frozen on my screen, but I can hear you. Let's just have a verbal conversation. You'll be recorded on the back end. This is the magic of podcasting live, folks. I'm in Wisconsin, Jourdan's in Louisiana, and we're trying to make this happen from afar. But he'll record his stuff on his side, and I'll see it. We may cut this part out. I don't know. Maybe it's a signal for us to look at the time and consider getting into our final closing thoughts on this transition, because a transition is so unique in all different ways. And I see him moving around, Jourdan, again. What else did you want to jump to in this episode about transition, or maybe some closing thoughts on this end that we wanted to talk through, Jourdan?
Yeah, and I do apologize. We're having some really severe weather right now in Louisiana. We actually had a large power outage actually last night for about 3-4 hours. And yeah, it's some bad weather right now as well. So if I did have some connectivity issues, that's why. Just a big just heard a lot of thunder just now. So but definitely as we close out, I guess I really want to think about, what is that one thing, right? We want to share to an outgoing leader, right? We kind of touched upon it a little bit as well before they, actually walk out the door, right? And I guess for me, I would say be mindful that after you leave this organization, right, it still has to run, right? So be mindful that making sure that you write those notes, right, to the incoming leader. Make sure that you are very intentional of connecting with your advisor as well, right? And making sure that they're aware of things that, because especially the advisor is not as involved as some advisors, right? You gotta make sure they're prepared to support the incoming leaders too, right? So communication is really important. Documentation is really important. And also if you can just support them from afar too, right? Whether you just graduated, you got a full-time job at across, and you're in now a whole nother state now, right? Check in, do a couple check-ins, check in with them periodically throughout the year, especially that first year. See how you can support them from afar. And I think that's servant leadership, right? And being mindful that this organization it needs to continue to thrive and enhance the experience for all involved after you're done.
That's so important, and I'm going to piggyback on that idea of support. You're going to be, a lot of you are going to be doing that transition at, again, the NACUR conference. It lives in my heart, and I see that as a story of where one story closes, a new story begins. And we celebrate the leaders that paved the way. And then a new leader is going to be building their foundation, their next chapter for our organizations on campus. So that support and that network you're going to meet in this coming week or weekend, and stay in touch with those people. There's so many people that can give you support. And as your organization is taking form and taking shape, the way that you lead is going to be different than the way that others lead. And getting to know yourself and your leadership style in the context of that organization is so important. And that's something that we want to help you in that journey and have you on about if you've been through that journey, right? That transition. We'd love to chat with you about that. We'd love to help you find your voice and channel those strengths, whether that's Clifton Strengths Training, whether that's working through some of those basic things that happen within transition and guiding documents or kind of organizing your thoughts and goals for the year, right? You have so many opportunities to do that on your own and with your advisors. And there's so many great stories of what you've been able to build out there. But if you just need that extra support, something that Jourdan and I are super interested in helping out with. So celebrate your successes for the past year and get excited for a brand new ride in the coming year for those advisors and student leaders that are taking on new roles. So we're excited that for everyone in that next year, we're excited that we can keep talking to you every week. And we're excited to close out this episode 9 and keep Jourdan safe out there in the storms. So with that, it was really a pleasure to talk to you about transition and passing that torch. We're going to pass that torch over to you in these coming weeks. But until next time, my name's Alex.
I'm Jourdan.
We'll see you in the next one. Take care.
Bye.